Hello and welcome to this latest episode of The Terrace, available only on youtube.com and to our Patreon subscribers for the audio. I am your host Craig Fowler and I am joined by Euan Taylor. Hello Euan.
Hello Craig, how are you?
I'm doing well, Euan. Thanks for asking. And on this show we are going to be discussing Derek Adams, the Ross County manager. It's out the door. It only took 12 games, 79 days, 2 wins, 3 draws, 7 defeats. He tenders his resignation after the 5-0 defeat by Motherwell on Tuesday evening. That was accepted by the Ross County Board, and now Don Cowie has taken over the club in the interim period, presumably until the end of the campaign. Ross County didn't say how long it was going to be, because Ross County tend not to do that when it comes to contracts, but the fact that they brought out a statement saying he's going to be an interim charge rather than just writing a line at the bottom of the statement saying that Adams was leaving would suggest he's here to the end of 2023-24. So myself and Euan are now going to talk about Adams, his brief spell in charge, and then we'll talk a little bit about County going forward. So, Euan, this is just quite funny, isn't it?
It really is. I don't think you probably have to go back a while for at least a non sort of old firm figure that the whole of Scottish football has been more desperate to fail than Derek Adams. You could tell with literally everybody talking about it, like the amount of sort of snide comments that were made on like Sports Scene, even like when they got beat. Basically, obviously, since his comments after it was the defeat to Dundee, wasn't it? That was when it really went, and it's a real turning point if you look at his reign, because when he first came in. Now, I don't know what you felt. I know obviously you did a podcast with Mark, wasn't it, the Ross County fan?
Yes.
Who was quite enthused by Derek Adams' appointment, and he actually wanted Derek Adams. Before Derek Adams, it was clear that Derek Adams was getting the job. So it wasn't just a case of sort of convincing himself after the fact. And I mean, I didn't agree with that personally. I thought, and it's more to do with like the fact that that if you listen to any of Telfer's podcasts, the Tell Me Spelly ones that he's done with players that played at Ross County at any point or played under Derek Adams, I mean, it's pretty much universally everyone thinks he's a prick. Like everybody did. Everyone thinks he's a weirdo. Everybody thinks. I mean, obviously you could argue was well, you don't need to argue, but he was successful in previous spells at Ross County, but they're a different club now to what they were then, I think, with different goals, and his personality just seems entirely ill-suited to being a football manager for a start. But I think particularly being a football manager in Scotland, because it's too small. It's too small. You can probably say weird stuff after being a game at Maidstone or Maidenhead or wherever. Morecambe, that's what it is. I always forget which
say Maidenhead.
I always do that. I forget which like nondescript English town beginning with the word M that you managed that previously to Ross County. But I imagine you can, yeah, exactly. You can get away with saying what you like after being like Mansfield manager after a game, and nobody, other maybe the local press and like a couple of fans might notice. But you're on national TV when you come out with your weird nonsense after conceding a last minute goal, and it just basically all went wrong from there. I mean, at that stage, the previous 4 games, you've got a draw, 2 wins and a defeat. Defeat being away to St Mirren, which is fair enough. And it was just that you lose a last minute goal against Dundee, and again I thought Dundee actually were the better team. That was one of the things that the Adams sort of refused to accept in his post-match comments that day. But I mean, it was a tight game. It could have gone either way, and he just completely lost the head. After that, obviously, didn't win a game.
Yeah, I should probably read out the comments for anybody who's been living on the moon for the last few months. The standard is shocking. But to be fair, he says 2 things here. He says 2 things. One of them I agreed with. Another one, and I think a lot of Scottish fans, based on this season, would have agreed with him, which is that he said the standard is shocking. It's one of the worst games I've seen. I've been back and I see the standard and I think, wow, any chance? If I'm a spectator watching this today, I'm thinking, is this what Scottish football is all about? It needs to up its game. Now, I think that's fair enough. Like, we've talked loads about the standard of entertainment this season in Scottish football has been really poor. I actually think it's got better. I don't think it's got hugely better, but I think we've seen a lot better, more consistently better games since Adams came out with that. I don't think it's...
I don't think
the two are really related at all. I think it's just...
No.
It was always kind of going to bounce back, and you've seen a bit more entertainment on show since then, because it couldn't really get much worse. Basically, it was kind of been a bit of a dead cat bounce, you could probably say. But then he went on to say, I've left a team down in League Two that's miles better than this team. Miles. That's saying something. We had the bottom budget in League Two, and they were 100 times better than this. So then, although he's not decrying the league as a whole, he's obviously not then saying that Ross County are 100 times worse, or his squad is 100 times worse than everybody else in the league. So he is now bringing down the standard of Scottish football. He's saying the standard of Scottish football is relative to the bottom of League Two. And that's when you get everybody's backs up. That's when every Scottish football fan is like, hold on a fucking minute here. That is absolute pish. Because, the standard hasn't been great in terms of entertainment, but if you look at this season in the kind of wider context, like Celtic, Rangers have had very good results, and Rangers won away to Real Betis, Aberdeen beat Eintracht Frankfurt, Hearts beat Rosenborg, Hibs beat Luzerne. Like, that would suggest that the standard in terms of levels compared to other leagues, and especially if you're comparing it to Morecambe, isn't that bad. And the worst thing you could do when you're talking about Scottish football and you're talking about the standard of Scottish football is say it is worse than anything below the top end of the English Championship. Anything below that, you say the standard of Scottish football, and Scottish football is going to turn on you in a second.
And rightly so.
Yes.
And even that game, it was a complete head loss, and it was because of conceding the 97th minute winner. Because that even you could say fair enough, maybe slagging off the standard we've all done it this season. Albeit, I think it's very unwise to do it in his position. But okay, he did it. But that game actually was quite good. Obviously I did the most 90 minutes of it, but I watched the highlights. There was a lot of there was a lot of chances in that game. I think and Dundee had the majority of them. So it was actually quite like a fun game with like a fun winner.
Tony said this, isn't he? Tony said this quite consistently, where that the league's bad because everybody kind of plays 3-5-2, but Dundee are one of the teams that plays 3-5-2, and it actually makes sense to the players in their team. Less so recently with the injuries, but when like Lamy and Portala's in there in the back three, and they are actually one of the best, if not the best team to watch in the league this season.
Yes. Yeah, because they also can't really defend that well, so and they make make mistakes. They're in games, Dundee, every week, which makes them fun. But yeah, he turned the whole country against him at that point. Or you could tell, obviously, with Martindale's comments after the Kilmarnock game that Livingston played in the other day. You could tell that it's obviously got the manager's backs up. So it was just. Such poor man management of your own squad, such poor, and I know he might have been thinking, well, I'm 2 weeks away at that stage. I was the 16th of December that those comments he made. He's maybe thinking at that stage, well, I'm 2 weeks away from being able to turn over this whole squad, so I don't care if I piss them off. Yeah. Well, but we've seen how he turned over the squad, and didn't. He definitely doesn't seem to have made it any better. And it's poor. I think it made everybody else more fired up to beat them as well. And it's just been a complete disaster of probably the most catastrophic sort of post-match comments any man I can remember any manager making. Other than maybe when like Cathro couldn't get his words out after that, that game. It's similar. That's a similar one in terms of like. As soon as you read it, you're like, yeah, no, this isn't going to work, is it? Like that, it was just you can't react like that after a game, and it's since then he's really just been sort of after even at that stage, things weren't going that badly, and even the next game you did get a result against Hearts, but it was you got a draw, but it was quite obvious that the the players weren't having him at that point. I think after that, and obviously the rest of Scottish football wasn't having him.
Well, that's the thing. You talk about like kind of heads gone, but at the same time, the work that he did in the January window actually reflected that he believed in what he was saying.
Yes,
that he believed
exactly.
that the level of English League Two was better than that of Ross County and Scottish football as a whole, because like the players they brought in were rubbish, and you could say like the Hearts game, sorry the comments after that Dundee game were a turning point. I actually forgot that he'd been in charge so long before then. I kind of had it in my mind that it was like his second or third game. But it was actually his fifth game in charge. And before then, he had a record of 2 wins, a draw, and a defeat. Now, you could say that's just kind of a new manager bounce, anyway. But after that, they get the draw at Hearts. Now, yeah, I think he has, because you can say like, well, that's played no part in annoying the players. They go out and then they have arguably their most impressive result of his entire tenure the following game. But going to Tynecastle, getting a point, probably being a bit unlucky not to take all 3. There was a bit of controversy where they were trying to get a sub on in that game, which I think was for the equaliser. And I think the second sub was taking a bit of time, and the referee was just like, right, fine, you're waiting, basically. And I think one sub came on and it was supposed to be 2. Whereas most refs would probably just go, oh, all right, okay, right, fine. Hurry up, get your second sub on, kind of thing. Instead, Hearts quickly took the play, went up the field and scored. And if that doesn't happen, County probably leave all 3 points. Now, saying something like that about the players doesn't necessarily mean that the next game they're just all going to down tools. It just kind of creates a culture, a mindset of we don't like this guy, and then that can snowball and fester as soon as things start to go wrong, which they did. But you could also say as well that maybe it wasn't that much of a case of the players being demotivated by what he said. It's more about the fact of what he did to the squad.
Yes.
Because the Hearts game was on December 30th. They then lost to Aberdeen after that. Now, that was one of the few games where Aberdeen actually looked like a proper football side. And Aberdeen always win at County anyway, it certainly feels like to me. So, but it was then after that. So when you play Partick Thistle, by that point, he's had the chance to sign a few players. These players are in the squad. And then the results after that are 4 defeats and a draw, culminating with that absolute disaster against Motherwell. And if you look at his signings, Jesus fucking Christ, they're just absolute pish.
Yes. And we obviously we did podcast throughout the January window where we sort of reviewed all the signings as they happened, and every week it was like, oh, Ross County have signed 4 guys from League Two, and they all look pish. It's like, they just kept on racking up more signings, and certainly with some of them we were like, well, I don't know, he might be okay, he's a young player, he's not really played, he'd probably just be back up, and then they're all just go straight into the team, and he can't. I mean, get the Motherwell game. Just there was obviously the culmination of everything. I mean, I think it was 5 new signings started that game.
I'll confirm that in a second. Yeah, I believe it was. Let me just have a look.
And you're getting to you're getting to a point where there's no question. Obviously, Ross County are in a relegation scrap. In that game, they've got 5 new signings starting, all of which I believe are loanees. You've also got the guy who you've made captain for the last couple of games, in Jan Danda, who has signed for Hearts.
A strange decision. A very strange decision.
You can obviously, how much does who the captain is matter? I mean, you can argue that. I think it probably does matter that the lower down the food chain of football you go, and the more players might need a bit of G'ing up. I wouldn't have said Jan Danda, just the type of player he is in terms of, he's a bit of a good, very technically good player. Maybe you could say he leads by example in terms of his best technical player in the squad, but he is not. That's
not really what you want somebody to lead by example. You want somebody to do like all the running and to do all the kind of the tangibles of the game very well. Because if somebody's leading by example who's just a very technically gifted footballer, it's still like, well, I can do that now.
Exactly. Yeah, you see that free kick I scored against Hearts from 30 yards out. You do that. No, I can't. All right. Well,
you do that, Will Nightingale.
Yeah, exactly. So he doesn't. I mean, I don't know what Jan Danda's like off the park, but he's not the sort of blood and snotters type captain that you might think a team down the bottom of the league would ideally want. So stats and odds, and more to the point, he is not committed to the club beyond the end of the season. I mean, he just literally isn't. He's signed for somebody else. So you have 6 players, including the captain, taking the field against Motherwell the other night, who are not going to be at the club beyond the end of the season and not contracted to the club you might have. I mean, I would have to go through the rest of the squad to work out whose contracts might be up. Obviously, lots of players are in that boat. Oh, lots of teams are in that boat where they've got players whose contracts are expiring at the end of the season. That's a common thing in Scottish football. But I do think it's different when it's a loanee, when it's somebody who. I mean, how much does it matter to these guys? It's no slight on them, but how much does it matter for for guys that have just been sort of pitched in? Their parent club sent them up to the Highlands on loan, and that to learn, and that's great. But you don't want like half the team being made up of loanees, surely. I mean, surely that is not a healthy position. All these guys will go back to their parent clubs in the summer, and does it really matter for them if Ross County go down in the way it does matter to a Jordan White, to a Simon Murray, to guys who are contracted to the club to a Laidlaw.
Do you want to know this? There's one thing, like, so I was going to come on to this when we talk about County and we talk about like Ross County going towards the end of the season and what they could do to salvage this. Because I do think it is salvageable because they weren't necessarily they've got a bit worse under Adams, but they were still 11th. They were just a bit more competitive in 11th with the teams above them when it was Malky Mackay in charge. Now, other than Kyle Turner, and I'm not entirely, I probably should have looked this up, I'm not entirely certain on the rules of loans. I don't think you can. I don't think you can recall them now because it's outside the transfer window. No. So Kyle Turner, they can't get back. So that's one player that Adams dispensed of that a new manager or Don Cowie would maybe like back in the building. Other than that, Ben Purrington is probably the only other one, but even then, I kind of liked Purrington, but he's not like, you've already got, like, even if you say Cameron Bothwick Jackson is rubbish, and I think he is, you've still got George Harman, who's good as a wing back, less so as a left back, and Josh Reid as well. So there is kind of, there's a lot of cover there that you won't necessarily miss Purrington, even though he's a bit more of a kind of a steady head. Other than that, it's pretty much the same squad, so there is something salvageable there. They've just added so many bodies to it, but you don't necessarily have to play these bodies, but just having them in the building isn't really conducive to a good culture. Do you want to guess how big Ross County's first team squad is now?
I was just about to have a wee look there, but you tell me.
I have added them up. Do you want to have a guess, first of all?
26.
Very close, 27.
That is
27 first team players.
Too big. That is just too many players. Just too many players. For a team of Ross County. I mean, it winds me up so much at all levels of Scottish football that play teams that carry too many players, because it's such a waste of money, it's such a waste of resource, and it blocks. It just stops you. It really stops football clubs functioning well.
It blocks pathways for young players. As I said as well, it's just, does it create a good environment? I mean, there's a couple of players in there. I mean, you say 27, I'll maybe go you 26, because there's a guy there, Jamie Williamson, who's down in this list who I've never heard of. So if you want to take him out, you can maybe say you're correct.
No, good.
Because I've heard of the other young player that's come through that's in this list, Dylan Smith. I've actually heard of him. Seen him play. I have no idea who a Jamie Williamson is. He might have just been flung in this list to be made up to see if anybody notices.
Quite possibly. But I assumed it was going to be too big just because they just pumped it full of knees, and you've got so many. I mean, obviously they'll have injuries and suspensions and so on, but you're just carrying too many guys that just will be sitting in the stands every week, which is, for a club like Ross County, you just cannot function like that. And I suppose it's a symptom of the managerial change, and I think Adams obviously made clear his thoughts on the Ross County squad and Scottish football in general, but specifically the Ross County squad, and he was afforded the opportunity to turn it around in the January window, and that's just looking like a mistake. I mean,
and instead he signed Teddy Jenks, who was hated by Forest Green Rovers fans, literally the worst team in England's League Two.
Yes.
I
mean, if anyone's not watched the highlights of the Motherwell Ross County game from the other night, I strongly encourage you to do so, because not only did Motherwell score some absolute crackers, which is sort of
some of the Motherwell goals are brilliant.
Blair Spittle was just unbelievable, but it was a very much a case of, well, that's a bit of a shock result. How did that happen? And one team played brilliantly, and the other team played horrendously, and that's how it ended up 5-0. So Ross County were very much architects of their own downfall in spells in that game, and they just had some performances like Loic, who we'd obviously talked about when he signed. A guy who
I thought might be one of the better sides. He had an all-timer against Motherwell.
He might still be, but that was the thing. We saw him last season at Dundee United, and that's how he was. He had some games where he was very good, and he had some games where he was absolutely shocking and cost Dundee United the points. And you couldn't say he cost Motherwell, cost them in the Motherwell game, because I think they would have lost that anyway. But he certainly didn't help, but he was absolutely brutal. So yeah, I mean, I was comparing like the results. Across so I think Malky Mackay. And this is just league games. Obviously, Mackay had the League Cup, and Adams had the Cup game, the Scottish Cup game. But Adams was in charge for 11 games, 2 wins, 3 draws, 6 defeats. Malky Mackay has 12 games, 2 wins, 4 draws, 6 defeats. So very similar. I mean, it's like Malky Mackay is like 0.83 points per game. Derek Adams is 0.82 points per game.
All right, I didn't realise it was that. I said earlier that they got worse under Adams.
Slightly.
They did very, very slightly. Very, very slightly.
But Malky Mackay did have 3 games against the Old Firm, whereas Adams only had 1. So,
right.
So
okay.
that would be, I would say, yes, they have probably got worse. And I didn't check sort of like goals conceded and goals scored and things like that to see if there's much of a difference there, or XG can prevent. But it doesn't feel to me that they're playing any better under Adams. And not to defend Malky Mackay. I mean, that wasn't going well, and they shouldn't have appointed him in the first place, obviously. But I think a change, given the way the last season ended for them, and you were very lucky to stay up in the first place. They probably should have made the change in the summer, not to Derek Adams, but to somebody else. But to give Malky Mackay the start of the season, I think it was the right decision probably to change when they did. It was just completely the wrong decision to go with Derek Adams. But of course, the other wild thing, I mean, he did sign off with another, like, one last sort of wild statement in the relegation thing. So the relegation announcement. Oh yeah, sorry, not relegation announcement. That's to come. Resignation. That's to come. Resignation announcement.
I don't think they have to release a statement for that.
Sorry, we've been relegated. Yeah. So he said, after much consideration in recent weeks, I've made the decision to resign from my position as first team manager. Over my 12 league games in charge, which is, I think that's actually wrong because it was 11. As I counted them, but anyway.
Yeah, it's 11 league games, 1 Scottish Cup game, but they got beat 3-0 at home by Partick Thistle.
So that's your first mistake. We have moved 6 points clear of the team directly below and have been extremely close to getting more victories and draws along the way. And then he says, so Ross County are close to my heart. And
this is we moved 6 points clear of a Livingston side that haven't won in months.
Yeah, I thought that was brilliant. It was like, you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of George Bush in The Simpsons when he's writing his memoirs, and he's like, there's no need. It was like, but Derek Adams was like,
I completed everything I wanted to in my first term, so there was no need for a second.
But with Adams, it was like, I've achieved all my goals as Ross County manager in the first 3 games. There's no need for any more. It's like, you got it.
But when Don Cowie stays up, what keeps County up at the end of the season, Derek Adams will be like Leonard Nimoy in the Monorail episode. my work here is done. You didn't do anything. Didn't I?
I mean, that is...
And then he just dissolves in air, which I think is what most people would prefer Derek Adams to do.
I mean, I thought that was incredible, to sort of to paint it as if he's sort of, it just hasn't worked out, but I have dragged this away, to safety. I mean, complete and utter bollocks. As if obviously you look at the if you look at the overall picture, he's basically just done slightly worse than Malky Mackay did, and it's just the fact that Livingston cannot win a game against anybody, that they aren't in worse bother than they are.
They certainly are. Right, Euan, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Craig.
And thank you to everybody for listening. Please make sure to like and subscribe. We'll talk to you again soon. Goodbye.